good afternoon, good morning, or even good evening, because we are having participants from different parts of the Atlantic Ocean. So my name is Sofia Cordeiro, and I'm the coordinator of the Ocean Program at the Portuguese Foundation for Science and Technology, the acronym that you will hear probably for sometimes today it's FCT. And I'm also the coordinator of the European funded project supporting the implementation of the blank statement, that is supporting the cooperation in marine research and innovation at the Atlantic Ocean from pole to pole. Well, I would like to invite you all for a very exciting afternoon, morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. In today's Air Center Networking Friday, we will learn more about the America's flagship international exchange program, the Fulbright Program, and hear about the results of the Fulbright and Air Center Award, as well as some US and Portuguese Fulbrighters projects and achievement. Believe it will be an awesome evening or morning or afternoon. Well, as a brief introduction, because I don't have much time, one of the core activities at the institute where I work, FCT, is the promotion of international cooperation, where mobility of researchers is a fundamental piece. Having this in mind, and the strong interest of Portugal in promote research and innovation at the Atlantic Ocean, FCT and the Fulbright Program, together with Otília Macedo Reis that we have here today, decided to establish in 2017 an award in space, atmosphere, ocean, climate, energy, and data science that offers the opportunity for US scholars to research in disciplines where within the scope of the Air Center research agenda. Our first speaker of today will be Dr. Otília Macedo Reis, who will present us this award. Then we will hear a series of very interesting presentations from US and Portuguese Fulbrighters projects in a session later on moderated by Dr. Regina Duarte. Let me start this session by presenting Dr. Otília Macedo Reis. Otília has developed her career in an international environment, having worked in the Portugal-Angola Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in an international law firm, and since 2001 at the Fulbright Commission in Portugal, where she started as a communication assistant and later worked as an administration office. She served twice as acting executive director before being selected in 2007 as the executive director of the commission, her current position. Dr. Otília Macedo Reis has received an undergraduate degree in international relations from School of Social and Political Sciences of the Technical University of Lisbon, and completed a non-degree program in international cooperation and development at the School of Economics and Management at the Technical University of Lisbon, and an advanced studies program in public policy at an institute in the University of Lisbon. Otília, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sofia, for the kind introduction, and hello everyone on both sides of the Atlantic, as you so well put. I would like to start by sending my congratulations to the Air Center team for the success of this initiative, the Networking Fridays. And also I would like to thank you all for welcoming this idea of having a special session of the Networking Fridays focusing on the Fulbright program and the cooperation with Air Center, which has had some fruitful developments over the recent years. I am going to share my screen because I'm going to take this chance to briefly present the Fulbright program and the way it is administrated not only in Portugal, but in other parts of the world. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. Okay, so quite briefly, the Fulbright program, as Sofia said, is the American flagship exchange program. It was created in 1946, which means that this year, 2021, we will be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Fulbright program. And if you're interested, please check on this website where all the events and activities are being highlighted. The goal of the program, the goals of the program initially and still up until today, was to promote international understanding and cooperation, but doing that through the collaboration, direct and personal collaboration between students and scholars from the US and from other countries in the world where the program is administered. It is run by the State Department. It is an American program via the Bureau for Education and Cultural Affairs of the State Department. But the fact is that the program is enriched by this binationalism that is one of the keystones of the Fulbright program. This means that it's bilaterally administered by the United States in collaboration with other countries in the world. I know that in this session today, we have participants from over 20 different countries. So if you're interested in the Fulbright program, I will focus more on the opportunities and grants available in Portugal. But if you're coming from another country, please check your Fulbright Commission in your country, or if there's not a Fulbright Commission, get in touch with the US Embassy in your country, where I'm sure all the grants and opportunities of the Fulbright program are offered. The country runs in over 160 countries. There's a network of alumni that, of course, is large because of the fact that the program is running since 1946, so over 400,000 alumni are still networking up until today. And every year, still 8,000 new grants are awarded under the Fulbright program. It is a program of public diplomacy, but it's also focusing on public benefit. And this means that the participants in the program are diplomats in their own way. They're representatives of their country, their culture, their scientific environment, and they are supposed to give something back to their country when they come back from their Fulbright experiences, developing their fields of study, their communities, somehow giving back a part of the investment that was done in their training. Every year we have open national merit-based competitions in all fields of study, and we are very committed to bring the diversity of all the US and the Portuguese society, bring this diversity to the Fulbright Commission, our grants, and all our activities that we organize. In particular, regarding the Fulbright program in Portugal, it exists since 1960, when there was a diplomatic agreement that created the Fulbright Commission for Educational Change between the USA and Portugal. This commitment was reinforced quite recently in 2015 with a new diplomatic agreement that came to strengthen the parity and the binational commitment by both governments. The mission of the Commission is to foster, of course, mutual understanding and build up cooperation in education and science through academic exchange opportunities, information and educational advising services. We do have an information center providing guidance to everyone in Portugal that is interested in studying and doing research in the US, and by promoting events and knowledge sharing initiatives, bringing together again participants from both countries. Being bilateral means that our funding is binational. We receive funding from both the US and the Portuguese government. Our board of directors is also binational. It's composed of Portuguese and American board members. And since 1960, we have had more than, nearly 3,000 grants were awarded under the Fulbright program. I wanted to highlight here, in particular, the Portuguese partners that we work with, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of Science, Technology and Higher Education, and Ministry of Education, of course. And we work very closely with FCT, that Sofia has already mentioned, and the Camões Institute, who is the agency promoting the Portuguese language and culture abroad. But we do rely on the collaboration with all the higher education and research institutions and other public and private institutions in Portugal, namely the Air Center, who work together with us in this particular Fulbright Award. But all the institutions help us recruit Portuguese Fulbrighters and host the American students and scholars when they come to Portugal, which is a very important part of the success of their experience. And again, being the Fulbright program focusing on networking, we also have a Fulbright Alumni Association, which is very active in promoting networking opportunities. In Portugal, we do have a very large and diverse portfolio of grants and opportunities to offer, mostly dedicated to the visiting students from Portugal that go to the US to do their graduate studies, full master's, full PhD grants. We also have grants for pre-doctoral research for those students who are doing their masters or their PhDs here in Portugal or in other parts of the world and would like to do some research in the US. Also the Portuguese visiting scholars to the US. These are postdoctoral senior scholars and researchers that can spend a few months in the US doing research or lecturing. We also have the grants for US students that come to Portugal to do their own pre-doctoral study and research projects. A very interesting program that we've run is the English Teaching Assistants, placed at Portuguese universities and polytechnics to teach English and American culture. And there's a branch of the program that supports US scholars who come to Portugal, either under the specialist program or the scholars, the core scholars program for postdoctoral senior scholars. And this is the focus of this lecture, of this conversation today, is exactly based on the Fulbright Award Air Center, which is one of these opportunities provided for US scholars and in collaboration with the Portuguese institutions that can apply to host US students, English teaching assistants, and scholars. As was mentioned before, in 2017, with the support of FCT, we've entered into an agreement to offer a Fulbright Award in space, atmosphere science, energy, and data science in collaboration with Air Center. This, of course, the focus of the research that is done by the Fulbright Scholars Air Center is very much aligned with the Air Center's research agenda: marine resources and biodiversity, healthy and clean oceans, Earth observation from deep ocean to near space, mitigation and adaptation to climate change, sustainable energy systems and data science. And of course, again, this is very much having in mind the establishment of multinational research networks in line with the goal of the Fulbright program of fostering mutual understanding and cooperation. The Fulbright Awards for academic year 22-23, the competitions are open in the US, and you'll be able to check the web links that we will provide after this session. If you want to check all the opportunities that are available for all disciplines, for specific disciplines, and in particular for the Fulbright Award Air Center with this list of topics. So I thank again for the opportunity to introduce you to the Fulbright program and to let you know about these opportunities. But as I finished my presentation, I would like to thank in particular the Fulbright alumni that will be the speakers and the moderator today: Elliot, Hazen, Xinlian, Stuart, Batterman, Anabela, Maia, and Regina, Duarte. I think this is a great opportunity to highlight the results of the Fulbright Air Center partnership, but also the excellent research being done by US and Portuguese Fulbrighters over the years. And that said, I will stop sharing so that I can introduce you our moderator today, Professor Regina Duarte. Regina Duarte is the principal researcher at the Department of Chemistry and CISAM, Center for International and Marine Studies at the University of Aveiro here in Portugal. She obtained a degree in analytical chemistry, a Master's of Science of the coastal zone, and a PhD in chemistry, all at the University of Aveiro. In 2018, Regina Duarte was awarded with a Fulbright grant for Portuguese scholars and researchers to develop research at Old Dominion University in the USA on the molecular characterization of complex atmospheric organic aerosols. Her research interests include the composition and health effects of inhalable organic air particles, wet and dry deposition of organic aerosols, and air-ocean interactions. Regina has been very committed working with Fulbright and the Fulbright alumni community since she's returned from the US, and I thank you again for this collaboration today. The floor is yours, Regina.
Thank you, Otília, for this nice introduction. It's really a pleasure for me to be here and to be invited to moderate this very interesting session of Networking Fridays with the Fulbright Portugal program. Today we are going to have 4 very interesting presentations. From Elliot, Hazen, Xinlian, Stuart, Batterman, and Anabela, Maia. I think we can start now with the presentation of Elliot Hazen. Unfortunately, he is not able to be here present, but he sent us his presentation. Elliot Hazen, just a few remarks about Elliot. He received his Master's of Science from the University of Washington School of Aquatic and Fisheries Sciences and a PhD from Duke University in 2008. Nowadays, he works at NOAA's Southwest Fisheries Science Center in Monterey, California, and his research interests fall in realm of ecology and ecological modeling with interest on the predator and prey relationship, scale, and oceanographic forcing. So Elliot's presentation today is going to be about the dynamic ocean management approaches to improve marine resource sustainability. So let's hear, and please, all the questions that you have for him, please put them on the key and hey, and we will do our best to share with him your questions, and I'm sure he will gladly answer to them by email or other ways. So I think we can start now. Thank you.
Olá, bom dia e obrigado pelo convite. My name is Elliot Hazen, and I work with the Southwest Fisheries Science Center, and was fortunate enough to be a Fulbright Scholar 2 years ago now in the summer in the Azores. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my research on dynamic ocean management approaches and how they can improve marine resource sustainability. And there's a number of collaborators, both from the US and from my time in the Azores, I'd like to give thanks to that are listed here below. I like to start with these videos because they show just how dynamic the ocean is, both in terms of the sea surface temperature shown on the left, where you have a La Nina developing in the equator. And then on the right is an image of a bluefin tuna swimming north to south to take advantage of these cooler temperatures where productivity and their prey are highest. So we know that ocean ecosystems move and the species that rely on them move as well. Yet a lot of the management approaches we use are relatively static. So one example of where new conditions can lead to new risks are for the North Atlantic right whale. There's a critically endangered population that was nearly extirpated by whaling until the 1980s, when there were less than 100 individuals left. And it was a conservation success story. These species migrate from the shore of Florida up to feeding grounds in the Gulf of Maine and the Bay of Fundy. However, these migration pathways and foraging grounds overlap with lobster fishing and a lot of shipping activity. So it took a good bit of management to ensure that their populations were as viable as possible. And the success story unfortunately turned bad in 2014-15 when the animals followed their prey further north into Canada, where a lot of the same management regulations were not yet put into place. And because of that, we ended up with a high number of entanglements. Of over 18 whales died of this fragile population. And you can see the news stories talked about changes to the lobster fishery and how right whale was yet again facing extinction. So one of the tools that we use every day when you're deciding to go outside are weather forecasts to get an idea. Is it going to be sunny? Is it going to be rainy? Do I need an umbrella? Do I need a jacket? And we've done this a good bit, or starting to do this in the marine environment for things like harmful algal blooms. So this is the probability of pseudonychia, which is a neurotoxin that affects everything from sea lions to your dogs you might walk on the beach. And so there is now a program called Sea Harm that predicts these HAB events up to 3 days out. But to be more proactive and more complete, it would be good to predict throughout the ecosystem, not just at the lower trophic levels. So the figure from NASA PACE here does a good job showing, can we predict from phytoplankton up to top predators to tell people where to fish and avoid these interactions, and also other areas where you can use the ocean sustainably. So this concept has been termed dynamic ocean management, and it's a management approach that uses near real-time data to guide the spatial distribution both of commercial activities. And this can be things like fishing, shipping, military activities, ocean noise. And this management approach is one that has to change rapidly in space and time in response both to the shifting nature of the ocean and its users, based on the integration of new data, either biological, oceanographic, social, or economic. And if it's not changing at the right scale, if these scales are mismatched, there's a decent chance that you'll end up not improving management to the optimal level. And this is an example of ecological informatics, or eco-informatics, that uses near real-time data streams and complex modeling algorithms to support the sustainable use of marine resources, again, in near real time, without the need for expert opinion or expert elicitation at each step in the process. So one of the precursors to a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about is this tool called Turtle Watch. And this was developed for the Hawaii swordfish fishery, where they were having significant interactions with loggerhead sea turtles that ended up shutting down the fishery. And what Evan Howell and his colleagues did in 2008 is use tagged juvenile loggerheads along with bycatch records to identify the sea surface temperatures where these bycatch events were most likely to occur. And so this is shown in the bottom right, where you can see between 63.5 and 65.5 Fahrenheit are the waters to avoid to reduce interactions with loggerhead sea turtles. And then in 2015, Evan also added in, with colleagues, leatherback sea turtles to this tool to get a more comprehensive view of what you should avoid bycatch species and still allow plenty of the ocean open to fishing. It's important to mention this is not a management tool in the sense that it does not close any area of the ocean to the fishing, but is provided informationally to help the fishers avoid these bycatch risks. It doesn't have to be used solely on fishing. These concept of dynamic ocean management also can be applied to things like blue whales, where we were fortunate to have 104 tags from colleagues at Oregon State that were collected using Argo satellite data. And then we correlated these using statistical models like generalized additive mixed models and boosted regression trees to satellite oceanographic data. So while Turtle Watch used temperature for whale watch, we've incorporated temperature along with chlorophyll, winds, sea surface height, and other variables to predict at a monthly time step and quarter degree resolution where whales are most likely to be, so that shipping activities can be adjusted in space and time to reduce risk. And then the final example that I'd like to dig into is EcoCast, which stands for Ecological Forecast, and is an example from the California swordfish fishery, where this swordfish fishery, we have been incorporating logbook and observer data, opportunistic sightings when it's available, along with tracking data for those more rare species that might not occur often, but still might have a significant effect on the fishery income. And then using a process that also incorporates economics, risk rankings from both fishermen and managers to come up with a tool that we can then share back to the fishermen and managers to provide them with the best information possible to avoid bycatch, but yet still target the species they want to catch. So this tool is shown in the top right. This EcoCast product is produced daily at 1/4 degree resolution, where areas in blue are the areas best to fish to try to find the swordfish and avoid the bycatch species, while areas in red are the areas poorest to fish. And so if you go to the website shown on the bottom left, you can get the latest imagery from the EcoCast tool. And the two papers shown here, the one on the bottom left talks about the tool building itself and the efficacy above more static management approaches, where the bottom right talks about the steps involved in building an operational tool. So why did we create EcoCast? Well, the California swordfish fishery, they fish using a drift gill net. And the drift gill nets, unfortunately, are relatively non-selective. So they're fished down to 200 meters in the water column at night, largely when the swordfish migrate to the surface to feed on mesopelagic organisms. But this gill net does also have interactions with California sea lions, a number of blue sharks, and then an occasional leatherback sea turtle. But unfortunately, this population of leatherback sea turtles are critically endangered, so avoiding them is of utmost priority. There have been a total of about 25 leatherback turtle bycatch or entanglement events since 1990, and shown here on the map by drawing both a box in space and time, a very large pelagic leatherback conservation area was enacted that closes this area to fishing for 3 months out of the year for the California swordfish fishery. And this was a very successful approach in terms that bycatch dropped significantly, if not down to zero, but it was at large economic cost to the fishery. So this fishery has declined from about 200 boats in the late 1990s to now less than 10, or maybe even a handful of fishers left targeting swordfish in our waters. So what we did for EcoCast, very similar to the tool of Whale Watch I showed previously, is we combined both species tracking data and observer data, very similar to the POPA data set that exists in the Azores. And in the tracks, you can see leatherback sea turtles are shown in red, blue sharks in blue, and California sea lions in orange, with blue shark observer data shown in green, and then swordfish in the bottom left shown in blue, also from the observer data set. This is combined with environmental data from satellites. Again, I mentioned temperature, sea surface height, and chlorophyll A, to build species distribution models. And we ended up going with boosted regression trees, partially because they do a good job gap filling when you have cloudy data like from chlorophyll. So once you've identified those ecological relationships between these 4 species and the environment, you can combine new temperature, new sea surface height, and new chlorophyll data with the model object to predict habitat suitability, again, in near real time at this daily time step. So you can see those predictions for, again, leatherbacks in the top left, California sea lions in the top right, swordfish in the bottom left, and then blue sharks in the bottom right. So these 4 tools or 4 model predictions are then combined into this EcoCast product, this integrated fishing suitability. Again, blue areas of good to fish and red of areas that should be avoided. And what you can see too is that this tool doesn't simply combine these species with equal weighting, but there's a risk weighting that is put together by fisheries managers and by fishermen as to what are the species most of concern. So in the example I'm showing you here, leatherbacks have a negative weighting of 0.9 compared to an equal weighting of the target species of 0.9. But the other bycatch species like blue shark have a weighting of just negative 0.2, about 1/4 of that of leatherbacks, and then sea lions have a weighting of negative 0.05. So a much less effect in the final product than do leatherback sea turtles. So jumping right to the results, here is the output of the models with swordfish on the left, California sea lions in the top right, leatherback sea turtles further to the right, blue shark tracking, and then blue shark observer data as well. So these are predicted again, as I mentioned, on the daily time steps, and then combined to produce this image, this video of bycatch risk and fishing opportunity from red to blue. So one of the things hopefully that's apparent is there are these kind of bycatch hotspots that follow mesoscale features, things like eddies and some of the areas kind of up to the northern edge of the California that have higher bycatch risk in red than the target species high catch in blue. 2015, however, was quite an unusual year in the California current. It was warmer than average, even though there was upwelling near shore. You can see that a lot of the mesoscale features offshore were not nearly as influential in bycatch prediction. And this is important because the static methods like the pelagic leatherback conservation area can be quite successful in a normal year, but it's important to reevaluate those in these abnormal marine heat wave years like 2015. So this tool can be used, as I mentioned, as a dynamic ocean management approach, but also to evaluate past closures. So on the left in 2012, you see the total number of days or the total percentage of days that were predicted to be leatherback sea turtle habitat. And then 2015 on the right, the total number of days as well. So dark green are those that are predicted to have every day of the fishing season or in that grid cell as leatherback habitat, compared to blue where 0 days were predicted to be leatherback habitat. And hopefully one of the things that's quite apparent is in 2012, about 80% of the leatherback habitat was within the PLCA, showing it is in the right place and during the right time. But again, this unusual year in 2015 had more habitat north of the PLCA and more habitat south of the PLCA than in a normal year. This map also suggests that there might be some areas within the PLCA that could still be safe to fish, where you would still avoid leatherback sea turtles and hopefully be able to catch swordfish as well, even though this map is only for leatherback sea turtles. So EcoCast, even though the fishery is smaller than it has been in the past, we're not done developing the tool. So one of the things we've done is, like with Whale Watch, we moved from a 1/4 degree monthly product to a 1/10 of a degree daily product using regional ocean model output. And we're doing the exact same thing with EcoCast as well. So you can see the difference in scale between the regional modeling output on the right and the satellite product on the left. Important to mention, these two images are not of the same day, so we wouldn't expect them to be the same, which is why they look different. The regional ocean model output also has the benefit of providing subsurface information. So things like thermocline depth that we know are important for a lot of these species can be incorporated in the modeling and prediction process. Another important step is to take this from a nowcast to multiple scales, so you can really give an idea of a short-term prediction, what things will be like tomorrow, next week, if fishermen are making decisions at those scales, and even next fall, maybe there's a good reason to invest in a different fishing license if there's going to be a high bycatch risk throughout the California current, all the way out to decadal projections, like out to 2100, to get an idea for where these new risks might be in the future, where when species move and human uses of the ocean have to move accordingly as well. This is part of a project that we have underway called Future Seas that is really trying to produce these multiple scales and specifically downscaled climate projections in the California current for tools such as this. James Smith has a paper that just came out in Journal of Applied Ecology in 2020, where he uses individual vessels as individual movers or individual based movement particles, and see how their behavior changes relative to a static closure versus a dynamic closure, how both rates of bycatch and target catch change under these different closure scenarios and fishing simulations. And then lastly, this tool, we don't want to just be applied to the California swordfish drift gillnet fishery, but there are other gears being explored. This is an example in the figure in the bottom right of the deep set buoy gear. And it's an important example because it's one that actually does not have very high bycatch rates at all, yet we still believe it's worth testing bycatch events to see how well EcoCast could or could not work for this alternative fishing gear. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about the work that was started and is still ongoing from my Fulbright appointment with the Air Center and the University of the Azores. In the box is the islands of the Azores, and you can see it's in a very dynamic region oceanographically. At the same time, it's a really important region for ocean economy and the blue economy. Specifically, things like tourism, fishing, and shipping are really important to the waters here and the people of the Azores. And a difference between the United States, where we've actually separated out management of military activity, shipping, and fishing, the Azores regional government takes that holistically. So this is an opportunity to go from a single risk, a single impact in terms of ecosystem-based fisheries management to a total ecosystem-based management approach. So we held a workshop in May of 2019 with the folks shown here, and we explored what species had the most data and were of most concern for this real-time biodiversity mapping project, and served as a kickoff that is still underway. So we identified tracking data from things like blue sharks, shown in Fred Vanderpeer's study here on the bottom left, and then the POPA data set I mentioned is the observer program from their regional fishery, shown on the top right. There's also line transect survey data that was conducted alongside the POPA, where there was essentially observations taken on board by a volunteer. And from that, we can build models like this. So this is an example, a draft model for big eye tuna, where we're predicting catch per unit effort over time. And you can see kind of these hotspots come and go. The Azores is a really important stopover site for these tuna, but the timing of their arrival and whether they arrive at all in a year can vary a lot. And it's not clear whether it's based on the local environmental conditions or population drivers outside of the Azorean archipelago. So in conclusion, dynamic ocean management approaches align the scales of management to the scales of environmental variability, the scales of animal movement, and human activities. And doing this holistically allows for a more sustainable use of the ocean while also protecting those species that are of utmost concern. And I would point to this newer review by Will Ostreich in 2020. One thing I didn't mention, but for EcoCast, is these dynamic management strategies actually have 2 to 10 times lower opportunity costs. So 2 to 10 times less area closed with the same conservation benefits than the more static management approaches. And this again increases both the efficiency, the efficacy, and sustainability of marine resource use. And then lastly, by design, these dynamic ocean management approaches change with ocean variability and long-term climate change, which makes it a climate-ready approach and maintains its ecological relevance under future scenarios of climate variability and change. So again, I'd like to thank all my collaborators and thank you for listening to my talk. And I apologize that I couldn't be there in person.
So I think we can thank Elliot Hazen for this very interesting presentation about an efficient tool to secure marine resources sustainability. We have some question, actually one question for Elliot, but unfortunately is not here. So I think the question is answered in the last part of his presentation, but we are going to send him by email or other means this question, and I'm sure he will be very glad to answer to him. So let's move on to the next talk by Xinlian Liu. Sorry if I'm not spelling right your name. Dr. Liu received his PhD of computer science from Louisiana State University. He worked at the National Meteorological Center, Control Data and Argonne National Laboratory before he took a teaching position at Wood College of Frederick in Maryland. He's also a visiting faculty at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and a guest scientist at the Frederick National Lab for Cancer Research. So his research interests include high performance computing and artificial intelligence. So today he's going to present a talk about enabling artificial intelligence on Portugal's supercomputers. So Xinlian Liu, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Regina. So I'll share my screen. All right. Bom dia, boa tarde. So very happy to be here. Thank you very much, Fulbright and Air Center, for the opportunity to visit Portugal and for the collaborations we were able to establish, and also for the opportunity today to participate in the networking and share our discoveries and findings. Yeah, this is about me. All right, so where I come from, and so I'm Fulbright Scholar in Data Science. That's 2019, hosted by University of Minho. I'm an associate professor at Rhode College. Rhode College is a liberal arts college. Primarily, my job is teaching over there. So for research, I work with Berkeley National Lab, and Frederick National Lab for Cancer Research is also part of the National Cancer Institute. My background is in distributed computing, high performance computing, and scientific visualization. So my background essentially is in large scale computation intensive jobs. That actually is a natural transition to what's emerging recently, as you probably hear most as data science or artificial intelligence. They are essentially, when people call it differently, but most time we are talking about machine learning. So my interests are in novel methods in machine learning and complicated data projects, data science, and especially problem with social impact. Unfortunately, I don't know too much. I know very little about marine biology, but I think the topic I'll present today is very interesting, and it's with great social impact. So I've been with different places. I've been working on projects such as humanity projects. I work on protein representation, protein classification, and cancer image segmentation. But in last 5 years, actually more than over 5 years, I spent most of my time on a very serious national health crisis in the United States, which is suicide. It's a leading cause of death in the U.S. And actually in the U.S., even the news media has been talking a lot about this high-risk group, including veterans and teenagers, those we care the most, those we want to protect. So over the last decade, the suicide rate has increased 30%. That's a shocking number. And recognize the challenge, the Congress has allocated $1 billion, actually more than $1 billion for suicide prevention programs, just for the Department of Defense and the Veterans Affairs for our military service members in the last 6 years. Still, despite all the efforts we're taking, in the meantime, over 6,000 veterans died each year by suicide in the U.S. So that's over 20% every day. And that's why this is, we call it the national health crisis, and we need to address it. But however, it's a challenging problem. It's a challenging problem because one size of data set, so it could be either too small or too large. So how so? Too small is it's hard to define. For example, when we study, we'll set up a cohort, and we will design the cohort. But it's hard to design a cohort for mental health. It's expensive, it's complicated, and the past journal studies, yearly cohort is a few dozens, a couple of hundreds. That as you imagine, doesn't really help much. On the other hand, the data could be too large. The data we are currently working with in collaboration with the Veterans Affairs, we are working on 24 million patients. And we have billions of documents, different kinds of documents we'll show, which I will show, and also trillions of medical records. With that, it's non-trivial even to process them on any supercomputer. Also, the high level of noise when we collect those data about suicide study or mental health study, it's hard to define. Many definitions itself are vague, and also it's a dynamic thought process. So in general, we don't understand well about mental health, unfortunately, and that's actually why we have been studying. The scientific community has been studying this issue for at least 50 years. If we go back to reading journals, intensive study for over 50 years, but we haven't seen any significant breakthrough. Because the mandate from the Congress and from the government, U.S. government, the Veterans Affairs, they figured, well, probably we have been following. Maybe we need to try a different approach. So instead of studying the in particular individual psychiatric evaluation, and let's try big data. So they comes to Department of Energy. I'm part of the Berkeley National Lab. So we so our specialty is in high performance computing and data process. So what about we process the entire health records and try to find patterns and try to find solutions. And that's actually what we did. Currently, the situation before we joined, that's REACH-VET and STORM. There are also some others. Those are programs organized by the Veterans Affairs. So they spend lots of resources. They actually are quite successful. That's a safety net. Still, we see about 20 U.S. veterans dying by suicide each day. So what we hope to achieve is by applying data mining, applying deep learning. In terms of geospatial analysis, genomic and NLP and other methods, we try to catch as many. Right? And here I put 0. So from 20 to 0, that is really optimistic. I would say even if we can catch one, that would be a success, because we are talking about people's life here. This is how we approach it. We collect data from different parts, and we apply different methodology. We use deep learning and to do it. Let me just have very brief go through the kind of data we deal with. This is a smaller data that we use for methodology development. This is not the large VA data. It is called MIMIC data. So in this data, and suicide attempts. There are different kinds of attempts coded by ICD-9. That's medical billing code for different means. And so as you see, they actually they could represent a very different behavior, and it's complicated to catch. Because of that, actually one idea would be why not we don't just narrow down on that, but we should look at all cause unnatural death, right? So, or unexpected death. There are all kinds of data. There are structured data, unstructured data. And by saying unstructured data, we meant the all kinds of nodes. You'll be surprised how many different kinds of nodes hospitals actually produce on all the patients. So in this smaller data set, we have about 13, 14 different kinds of nodes. In the larger VA data set, we actually have up to 1,000 categories of nodes and many thousands different kind of nodes. This is a sample of discharge summary. That is one kind of nodes, and you can say that it includes a wealth of information. Right? So in addition to demographic information, they talk about history and talk about the family, what kind of friends he may have, and his employment background, and a range of information. So with these, actually, sometimes it could be if we dig into this kind of information, the nodes, free format nodes, it can provide more information than the structured data, which structured data are the medications, diagnoses, and as such, lab tests. This is a sample of nursing nodes, and there are also other kind of nodes, social work nodes, psychiatrist nodes, and structured data could be lab results, clinical orders, and immunization results, surgeries. Put them together, and we build our model. This is the baseline we use to compare. Baseline is we compare our benchmark, our model with hospital score. Hospital score in hospital, they use this to evaluate the likelihood the patient may come back unexpectedly, right? So unexpectedly, so something unexpected may happen, not a pre-scheduled procedure or anything like that. So that if we apply this to a high-risk group, high-risk suicide or mental health group, that roughly can tell us, give us a good idea of when we may see that patient. And if we go back to here, if the first line is first row is attempts. So the second row is resulting death. This is in a smaller data set. But you may notice it's not all means of suicide are equal. Some are fatal, very fatal if you use firearms, handguns, especially former military service members. So it's almost you will die, and if you fall from a high place, you will die. But if you take drugs, drug overdose, it takes many times. On average, I think that takes you about 30 attempts before a fatal result. So what we want to do is to capture that before it happens. So if we have an unexpected comeback to the hospital, that could be one indication of we need to do something. We need to reach out to the patient. We build our deep learning models, and of course, a good model relies on good data to feed in. We use, there are two formats to encode data. We opted, one is FAIR, one is OMAP, so we opted for using OMAP. The reason we use OMAP, we adopt OMAP is object-oriented structure, and so it embedded with a hierarchical embedding. So we we applied concave space embedding. With that, the feature is the adjacent. So because OMAP is already have a hierarchy of concepts. All the concepts are related medical concepts. When we encode it in this particular way, so adjacent point, adjacent data input, they are medically related, so they are more meaningful. And with that, it greatly helped with our training. Here shows example how they actually distributed on the surface, and with that, we actually were able to get a ideal good representation in transfer from the input to the latent space for the model. We also apply transformers. We apply attentions to different concepts and behavior, and to make them work more meaningfully by organizing the data representation. This is our architecture for the model. And as a result, so 30 days unplanned readmission result, our method is on the third row, and actually fourth row, the last row, and the other two are the leading results published. So we get really good results. These are, of course, they are done using supercomputing, and it use that's the specification. We use a V100, that is a NVIDIA card. Here is in-hospital mortality results. We try to predict by looking into the medical records, medical history. We also get pretty decent results, I think better than others. That is one approach, looking at individual. We also look at spatial, geographic to take a public health approach. It's like if you think about heart disease. Of course, you can fix it. If you have a heart surgeon, you'll be able to fix a patient. But what's the thinking is, don't wait for your heart needs to go see a surgeon, but rather let's have a healthy diet. Let's educate the population. So that is what we are doing in another step. And here you just, I'm sure, do you see a cluster here? If I hope you didn't. You may see a cluster, but we actually intentionally make sure this is random. So trust me, there's no cluster here. That's actually the problem with traditional analysis, because when we are looking at clusters of suicide, we have to incorporate geospatial consideration. And currently, these are what's currently available methods and tools, Marine's Eye, Gary C, and NOC test. They actually derived from simulation of adjacent. The difference between geospatial clustering analysis and regular analysis is it actually doesn't have independence. All the data samples, they rely on other its neighbors, so it's not independent. It's not independent, so there's no good way currently to characterize it or describe it. So from simulation, and then we try to use formulas to match the results of simulation with varied degrees of success. Here is actually a example of how it could be misleading if you simply, without considering the neighboring information, it's wrong. For all your eyes looking is wrong. It doesn't tell you. And with the current method, Moran's I or Gary C, it's hard to decipher. So we actually we propose to use a graph learning, right? So graph-based learning. So we apply the attention, apply the connection topology to the neighborhood, and these maybe it's not easy to tell, but we have different kinds of connectivities. And so we skip the simulation and the statistics part. We directly learn as a group, as a geospatial spread out group. So that's what we are working on right now. This is the big data set we are working on. So it's a challenge for large data centers. So why it's a challenge? Again, my background is in material simulation, is in weather forecasting models. And all those models, you can imagine, they can easily decompose. And so by applying a lattice model, the atmosphere or the material, it's easily to scale up your model. So easily to use, actually typically currently a large scale simulation on material or weather could be used millions, if not more, cores effectively together. So that's a traditional use of large data center and supercomputer. For artificial intelligence-based, we are constrained by many new barriers. One is the CPU utilization pattern, the data moving pattern, and if it relies on a GPU accelerator, and then that's memory pattern, it would be different and or would be limited actually, and also limited by the learning platform, whether you're using a TensorFlow or using PyTorch. So it cannot go beyond too many nodes, and also it's bound by storage. So current storage solutions for supercomputing are not designed to handle like this kind of multiple incurrence of data or intensive incurrence of data. So these are all challenges. I was hosted by Dr. Rui Oliveira, who is the director of the MINU Advanced Computing Center. And so they maintain the supercomputer of Portugal. It is called BOP, and it's named after a former director of Texas Advanced Computing Center. And it's have the same architecture of STAMP, which is used at Tech. So so towards the end of my Fulbright visit, we applied for a program. It's it's Portugal UT Austin project, and our proposal was selected, and so currently together with them of our team, we are working on these to address the issue and help that. I think my time is almost up. So I've been talking about the US, just one more minute. So I actually, when I was in Portugal, I just casually Googled. So I wouldn't think this is an issue in Portugal because I never heard anyone talk about mental health issue, suicide issue in Portugal. So this is not any, I didn't really spend too much time, but very easily you can find out. So between 2000 and 2016, suicide rate in Portugal reached 87%. So that's a much steeper slope than the US. So even so, that may not represent the whole picture. First of all, it could culture issue, and that could represent with underreporting. And also, if we think about now, we have been I've been teaching remotely for a full year, and I understand Portugal has been in lockdown for a long time. Many people don't go to work, and that has serious implication to mental health. So it's a problem waiting to be solved. There are some references here. With that, thank you very much for listening to my talk.
Thank you so much, Xinlian, for your interesting talk. We have a few questions, but I think we are going to leave them after all the presentations have been done. So let's move forward to Stuart Batterman. Professor Stuart Batterman has a bachelor degree on environmental science from Rutgers University, a master's degree on water resources and environmental engineering, and a PhD on water resources and also environmental engineering from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. His research and teaching interests address environmental impact assessment, human exposure and health risk assessment, and environmental management. He works with theoretical work and applied laboratory and field studies, mostly measuring the toxic compounds, including volatile organic compounds found as pollutants in drinking water, ambient and indoor air, and also with statistical and modeling methods. He has his international projects are being developed in Africa, especially in South Africa, and also in Europe, in Portugal, Russia, and Finland. And he directs now the Hazard Substances Academic Training Program and the Pilot Project Research Program in the NIOSH Supported Education and Resource Center. So today's presentation is going to be about wildland fires and health, developing an agenda for research and policy. So, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Regina. Let me try to share my screen. Can you see this?
Yes, yes.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you.
And also, I just want to do a time check here. You have 2 more talks or 1 more talk after mine, right?
Yes,
okay.
You have about 20 minutes.
Plus or minus. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. So I'm going to describe some new work which I had anticipated to start on my sabbatical, which obviously has been delayed. This is a bit different from the prior work that I've done in Portugal, which was more with energy systems and indoor air quality. Here's a shot from Madeira. I have not yet been to the Azores. So today I want to very quickly go over sort of situation analysis about wildland fires, talk about evaluating some of the impacts, focusing on health, and then briefly get into some of the policies and strategies that might be used in some of the research needs. So of course, everyone's familiar with IPCC projections of increasing temperature with respect to impacts on regional weather. Of course, we've seen heat waves, extreme weather, changes in temperature, humidity, precipitation, moisture content. other things. And one of the impacts is to increase both the spatial extent of fires, the temporal extent the fire season is growing, and in a number of cases, the magnitude of fires. And of course, this leads to increased air emissions, and I'm going to be talking about the impact of air emissions on health. Now, at the same time, we also have what we consider to be increased vulnerability. And even today, the diversity of talks gets to some of the ideas here with ecological shifts and disease. For example, some of our forests now are very vulnerable to fires. We have encroachment, urban use of lands very close to wildland areas. We have changes in forest practices and agricultural practices. And so there, of course, a number of you that are going to be very familiar with this first area where we have climate change causing these anomalies in weather, which increases the wildfires, and this provides a positive feedback loop, making the situation worse. On the other hand, what I want to talk about is sort of the health aspect, where wildland fires increase ambient air pollution and lead to adverse health effects in terms of morbidity and mortality. And I wouldn't say suicide would be out of the realm here as well. There's also indirect effects, for example, due to heat exposure, that also can amplify the effects and make the health impact worse. So there's a growing literature, and I'm a neophyte in this area, and there are a number of different products out there, and I'll show some examples of the Global Wildlife Information System, which does have a number of EU partners in it, as well as my sister or brother university in Michigan, Michigan State University. I'm at the University of Michigan, so it's just down the road. One input from GWIS is basically a fuels inventory based on the type of biomass that's out there. This is often combined with the Canadian Fire Weather Index based on things like temperature, wind, moisture content, and so forth, which can lead to predictions of fire forecasts. And this was a forecast for earlier this week. There are some gaps here. For example, we're predicting high fire risk in the midst of a major snowstorm that occurred in the US. So this really wasn't quite on target, but certainly it would apply in many other areas. Now, more interesting perhaps to the health aspect is what actually happens rather than the prediction. And satellite imagery has been able to quantify locations of fires very precisely within about 8 kilometers with these satellites. And this is the 2018 picture, the 2019 picture, the 2020 picture from this particular product from MODIS and the VIIRS satellites. And I looked at some of this data for North America to look at some of the trends, and Canada and Mexico and the US are the major areas that have been burnt. These are, of course, the largest countries in North America as well. And very interested in looking at the trends. And over the last 20 years, it looks sort of flat. Going back to a different system, we can see perhaps an increase from the pre-2000 period to the 2010 to 2020 period. It's important to recognize that this is not necessarily representative of what's happening in other regions. And in fact, it's also important to represent the fact that the North America contribution to the carbon budget, or in fact, the area burned, is very small and barely shows up on this other plot going back to 1960, where most of the areas that have been burned are in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Africa, and in other locations. The North American contribution is quite small. Asia is obviously important as well. Now, in addition to the country level difference, there's importances in the regional differences. And from yet another system called the MTBS Interactive Viewer from US sources, we can look at the cumulative area that has been burned. And so in addition to the regional differences, it's important to recognize that these burn areas can be cumulative with the impact adding up. Well, returning to public health, what matters and for sort of direct impacts are the fire-related particulate matter emissions under 2.5 microns diameter, called PM 2.5. And this is an estimate from, again, the GWIS system showing the emission rates. And, we're interested in understanding where those emissions are going. And there are a number of different products that are able to provide both short-term forecasts and longer-term integrated estimates of particulate matter and exposure. Most of the work to date has been on PM2.5. It's a longer-lived aerosol, but there's clearly other contaminants in plumes from wildfires that are of health significance. In any event, these kinds of models are showing a regional, and in this case, continental distribution of smoke from the California wildfires in 2018 on the left and the 2020 fires on the right panel. Now, again, we're interested in emissions and their related health impacts. And at the same time, of course, we need to understand where people live, as well as many of the demographics, their pre-existing conditions that might lead to increased susceptibility of disease. And as I mentioned earlier, the numbers of people are growing. Now, I showed you trends from 2000 to 2020 over that time period based on UN data. We have 29% growth in population. And if we look at the urban population, we have a 52% growth across all the countries. And what this leads to is the juxtaposition or the commingling of these areas that may in fact be burned with dense populations. Now, most of my work has taken place in cities, and I've been doing air pollution work for 35 years, I guess, looking in Asia, in Africa, both occupational and environmental, and in the developed world as well. And one of these pictures is from Portugal over here. We typically look at air pollution issues by the sort of classical or criteria pollutants, and this is tended to focus on ozone and particulate matter. And this panel just shows the number of individuals in the US who are living in areas that exceed our national ambient air quality standards, which are considered to be levels that are above which are unsafe. So this is indicating we have about 82 million people in 2019 period living in areas that are exceeding standards. This picture would change again regionally. Now, bringing this back to wildland fires to evaluate the impacts, there are a number of different approaches, and Milne here talks about different levels of evaluation. In the full evaluation that's done, one of the interesting things in their literature review was that the health aspect was considered to be intangible, essentially not predictable or not considered in the analysis directly. And so, in fact, from the public health perspective, we know a number of factors that influence your health: genetics, behavior, social environment, health, illness, services, and the environment. And we have well-developed methods to look at what I call the source to effects continuum, where we might consider, for example, particulate matter emissions, the movement through the atmosphere, exposure, dose response relationships, and then the demographics and other information that we need to come up with estimates of the health impact. And many of you will be familiar with sources in transport and transformation removal mechanisms that affect the migration and the fate and transport of pollutants in the atmosphere. So what is surprising to many people, though, is the significance of particulate matter exposure. The Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation has, over the last 20 years, developed this global burden of disease framework. And the risk factors associated here are showing the number of deaths per year. And I've highlighted the ones that are relevant to air pollution. And if we look at them for indoor and outdoor air, we have on the order of 5 or more million deaths per year, which in fact represents 7% of the mortality across the world is due to air pollution. So it's a very significant impact, and most of this is due to particulate matter. Now, in terms of applying these types of methods called health impact assessment or analysis to wildland fires, there's really only a couple of applications, and this was done for the US based on a modeled projection using a dispersion model called CMAC by folks at EPA. And the bottom line here is that they're estimating the PM attributable to wildland fires over the mid-2000s period, not a particularly elevated area or region, was about 1 microgram per cubic meter. This would represent about 5 to 8 or so % of the particulate matter concentration on the annual basis. And this was estimated to produce on the order of 10,000 deaths per year in the US from the Krusky estimate, and 23,000 from another literature estimate. And but you can see the confidence intervals are quite large there. In terms of monetarization, the estimates here for the value or the impact is quite enormous. These numbers need to be added because this top one is short-term exposures and the bottom one is long-term exposures. And you can see annualized estimates ranging from about 50 to about $1,200 billion. This is so $1 trillion per year in terms of the health impact. So, you know, I'm trying to make the point here that the health impact, in fact, is an enormous driver that's really not considered. It's been considered an intangible impact of wildland fires. And to get this into the policy framework, of course, we have to consider what are the mechanisms and strategies that are available. And some of those are listed here. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of these. I did find it quite interesting in going through the literature to see these old pictures from the 1970s. And in fact, this Smoky Bear roadside picture, I remember as a child growing up in New Jersey, actually, about only you can prevent forest fires, and it sort of shifting the burden to the individual. Of course, with the COVID era, we've seen a number of personal actions, in particular wearing a face mask, but this isn't really a feasible option for dealing, in most cases, with community exposure to particulate matter from fires or from other sources. But there's this hierarchy of control, largely developed from the NIOSH framework, from the occupational framework, which may have some benefit, particularly for, well, it does have benefit for first responders and others. And then in the last couple of weeks, actually, US EPA has jumped into the game with what we call building fitness in terms of reducing smoke exposure indoors, with this challenge to develop some sort of room air cleaner in a cheaper, better, faster, more effective approach, with a contest and a $10,000 prize if anyone is interested in responding to their challenge by May this year. So fire science, the perception, planning, forecasting, implementation, policy, communication, assessment, of course, depends on good information, but information is not going to solve the problem because of these different types of collaborations and stakeholder relationships and uncertainties that are involved. And so this brings me to sort of some research directions that I'm interested in exploring in this. And first, looking at better emission factors and inventories for fires, looking at improving the spatial resolution of predictions and separating out the fire component. And also mostly perhaps interested in really getting to what are the health impacts. And for this, we need to have a good understanding of susceptible populations and then the risk factors that increase vulnerability to smoke, to fire-related pollutants. And then this information needs to be folded into the management context to be able to help mitigate and reduce the risk of fire. So, you know, I've tried to provide here a little bit of a situation analysis. There are a number of different tools. They haven't really focused yet on the health side of things, and they haven't been fully incorporated into our management and policies. So this is just a snapshot. I appreciate the time, and congratulations again to the Fulbright program on this huge diversity of presentations.
For your interesting presentation. Myself, I really appreciate, because I'm also interested in the health effects of fine particles. So so let's keep the questions for the last part of our session. And we are now moving forward to our last speaker, Professor Anabela Maia. She's an associate professor of biology at Rhode Island College. Her research is focused on fish physiology and biomechanics, especially on how fish respond to anthropogenic pressures. Dr. Maia teaches human and organismal anatomy and physiology courses, and she holds a PhD on biological sciences from the University of Rhode Island and FLAD Fulbright Portugal Scholar. Today, her presentation is going to be about how fish physiology and biomechanics can help the blue economy. So the floor is yours, and thank you.
Thank you so much for the great introduction. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my research, mostly on fish biomechanics and physiology, and how we can find information from that to contribute to a better, bluer economy. I'm going to start by telling a little bit about me. So I was a Fulbright, flat Fulbright and FCT grantee during my PhD. So I appreciate the invitation to be here. But I grew up in Lisbon, and this is like, you know, growing up next to the ocean, next to the estuaries, got me interested in all these questions. I did my undergrad in Portugal at the University of Lisbon, and after I graduated, I did some research on estuarine ecology. And then it was time for that migration and to move across the Atlantic to Rhode Island. At the University of Rhode Island, that's where I studied shark locomotion and the role of the dorsal fins. I will tell you a little bit about that project. And then I actually moved back to Europe. I was at Ghent University for a year as a postdoc, and then back to the US. I was at Tufts University. I'll tell you a little bit about the project we had there on the effects of turbulence. And then I actually had a landlocked position for 5 years. I was in at Eastern Illinois University. For those of you in the US, best known as a production of really good football players. But I was really missing the sea, and as I put on my PhD thesis dissertation acknowledgement, this poem from Sofia Cordeiro, "When I die, I will come to fetch the moments I did not spend near the ocean." So I wanted to leave you with the picture of Narragansett Bay, since I'll be talking a little bit about the bay. This is actually from the Graduate School of Oceanography at the University of Rhode Island. But this is a picture of our snowy campus in Rhode Island College. So we are also on the bay, even though we are in Providence, so we are closer to the northern portion of the estuary. I also cannot do this presentation without acknowledging the help of our students, the students in our lab. These are mostly undergraduate students, since Rhode Island College is a primarily undergraduate institution, although we do have a master's program, and if you are interested in a master's program, you can certainly contact us too. But students in the lab, they get a chance to go out and fish, they get a chance to work with the live animals, and they also get a chance to present their research at conferences. So very proud of their work. So why should we study fish swimming? Well, we like to eat fish, especially coming from Portugal. Fish on your plate is a treat, right? But they're also really good tractable models that have a very high diversity, and you can actually have a lot of different questions, because there's as many questions as there are species. The other aspect is that we can actually learn a lot from fish that we can have easily in the lab by looking at their conservation value in terms of fisheries, protecting the species too. We can look at the environmental impacts and the anthropogenic pressures that fish are under. We can look at them as models for ecotoxicology, produce science-based management, and also use them as bio-inspiration for technology, as you see here in this AUV that was built based on array. But I also wanted to leave you with this amazing picture of a trawl. So this is actually a camera caught image from the trawl in Narragansett Bay, kind of looking at the fish eyes perspective of how it is to actually be in contact with this nets. And again, as we heard before today, the selectivity of the nets matters, and we want to reduce bycatch. So the first project that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about in terms of how we actually learn biomechanics and physiology for the blue economy is on the dorsal fin of sharks. So dorsal fins, they've been in the imaginarium of a lot of people because how like sharks display them. They're also of conservation value because of the finning industry that finally we are banning, but culturally, fins were a prized market, had high market value. And we did this by looking at 2 species. And for those of you tuning in from the Pacific Ocean, that I know some of you are, this is actually an Indo-Pacific species. This is the white-spotted bamboo shark that we use for comparison because we could get them from San Diego SeaWorld. So they actually got shipped over FedEx Next Day Air, and they came to our lab that way. And the spiny dogfish, the Scolis acanthias, is actually found in Narragansett Bay water. So it's a very local fish that we were just able to go out and trawl and collect. I wanted to point out that these 2 species have very different fins. So the position of the fins, they're much further back in the bamboo, and they're separated in the spiny dogfish. They're also occupy different habitats. The spiny dogfish does more migrations and is more of a pelagic species, while the bamboo shark is more of a local species and actually is benthic, so it has a higher association with the ground. So one of the projects we wanted to do was to look at how their fins are able to impact the water behind that. And this is a collaboration with a professor at Harvard University, Dr. George Lauder. We were able to put spiny dogfish and bamboo sharks in a float tank. So basically think of it as a treadmill for fish. And we're able to put these little neutrally buoyant particles in the water. They actually get suspended. We illuminate them with a light sheet made of laser, and we can actually see the swirls behind the fins. So how do we do this? We actually collect high-speed video, and we can compare our time 1 and our time 2 and get obtain a velocity or vorticity field that actually gives us an idea of how the fins are working. So I'll show you a quick video. I apologize if it's choppy, but you can certainly, I'll explain to you in the next slide with the vectors. But basically, this is a tiny dogfish swimming in that float tank. And this is a black and white because our cameras are like to increase resolution. They actually are black and white, but this would be actually a green light sheet if you were in colors. And focus on the shadows here. The outline is going to disappear, but this is the first dorsal fin, and this is the second dorsal fin. I'm just going to quickly change the pointer so I can play the video for you. And I'll play it twice. So focus on the area right behind the fins and see if you can notice any swirls, any vorticity, and if the flow is actually being accelerated or slowed down by these 2 structures. So hopefully you were able to see some swirl, and I can actually show you what this looks like when you actually build that velocity vector field. And you can see here that there is a bluer area, which cooler colors represent slower flow. And there's a redder area here, which represents faster flow. So if you look at this in more detail, we can see that in the first dorsal fin of the spiny dogfish, the flow is being slowed down. Okay, so majority of the timestamps of the velocity of these vectors are going to be slower than the flow that's actually arriving at the fin. That's this dashed line here. While for the second one, we actually have the higher velocity So you can see that the majority of these traces are actually higher than incoming flow. And that's this red area here. So if I were to tell you that this fin is actually pushing the water, while this one here is actually slowing down and maybe stabilizing the fish, maybe now I can convince you that's actually the case. But we'll get back to that with some statistics in a second. Now let's compare this to the other fish, to the bamboo shark. So again, you'll see the bamboo shark, you'll see the fins coming in, the flow is coming from the sides. The outline is going to disappear, but you'll see the video playing. So focus on the flow that's happening here, and then as the other fin come into view, behind the other fin. So I'll play that twice. There's like this flow being shed of the both fins. Hopefully you can see that. They're very flexible, so it's a little trickier to like you have to look at a larger picture of what's actually happening. Very like sleek and moves through water very smoothly. So this is actually what it looks like. So basically what you can see is that the flow is actually faster behind each fin, because highlighted by these really red areas, okay? And if this doesn't convince you, I'd like to show you that the flow is always faster, as highlighted by this dashed line. All the lines are always falling forward greater velocity that background velocity. So these two fins are sort of working like paddles that push the water like away from the fins. So these two species seem to be doing something different. And we can also look at that by focusing on the propulsion, which is actually the component that's actually pushing it backwards. Okay, that's this one here on the top. Then we can actually look at the losses. That's actually where I push to the sides, but I don't go anywhere. And we can also look at the swirl being the vorticity, the vortices that are being created behind the fin. So what I want you to notice here is that bamboo shark is actually doing something very different from the spiny dogfish, especially for the first dorsal fin. So this spiny dogfish is like a torpedo shape. It's like a torpedo shaped shark, and it has a lot of rolls. So it actually gets perturbed a lot by turbulence or other waves, etc. And that fin is working a little bit like a keel in a sailboat. So just not down, in this case, it's on the upper position. And so we can actually see that in the case of the bamboo, they're both working as propulsion. And this information is now being used to actually look at other fish species, shark species that we don't have as much information for, and to actually be able to see how they actually, if they live more in the upper column or if they live more in the bottom. We can also use it to build better AUVs or automatic underwater vehicles that will go and explore the ocean for us. But I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about turbulence. So turbulence is encountered by fish everywhere. You can think of natural turbulence like the waves at the beach, but you can also think about the turbulence that we created by producing like energy from renewable sources. And what we want is that we want to make sure that these renewable sources are actually going to be minimizing the risks to the animals, right? So we want to make sure that they're going to be producing perturbations in the environment that don't disturb migrations, that they don't disturb like the fish metabolic costs. And we've actually realized that when the turbulence is at the size of the fish, that's really when they actually notice it the most. So if a tsunami wave goes through a fish, they might not notice because it's too large. If a little like jet comes to the fish, they might not care because it's just like it's a blip in their radars. And just so you know, this is actually the Rhode Island wind farm out of Block Island. So we have already been asking these questions also in terms of birds and how turbulence can affect the bird migration. So how do we go about doing this in the lab? We actually use this like flow tanks, like I showed you before, but now we can actually isolate them and measure oxygen. And when we measure oxygen, we can actually measure the metabolic rate. So we can actually have a proxy for how much energy the fish is using. And ideally, we want the fish to not be too impacted by the turbulence that we produce. So in this case, we're doing streamwise vorticity, kind of like what you'd get out of an impeller of a boat. And here I have a bluegill sunfish. They're great species, even though if they're freshwater, to use in the lab as model species because we know so much about them. But what I wanted to see is that once we actually hit it with the turbulence, this fish gets perturbed, okay? And it has to actually find its way into water column again. And this is very energetically costly. So this actually is costing the fish a lot of energy. And so what you can see is that they'll have to actually have this spill, so kind of a stripping. So you're going to have like the increase in the spill rate, and we're also going to have associated an increase in the oxygen consumption. So these turbines are actually, at the size of the fish, are actually perturbing the fish. We now want to make sure that we are minimizing this so that we can actually produce, deploy renewable energy turbines that actually will not perturb the fish a lot. And the last case study I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is the effect of temperature on muscle mechanics and also on respirometry. So what is happening in the bay? We know that the bay was, the Narragansett Bay was mostly occupied by flounders and spiny dogfish and smoothhounds, but now there's scup and black sea bass coming in. Why are these species taking over the native species? And so in order to do that, we just place fish in a growing environment at 20 degrees Celsius, and then we measure them at different temperatures. And we were able to measure both the oxygen consumption and also how their muscles are working. And so our question is, how are these species adapting to the raised oxygen temperature, and if their oxygen consumption and their muscle mechanics are actually changing? So what have we found so far? We found that the flounder species are actually not as affected in case of their metabolic rates. But when their metabolic rate does not grow, does not increase with temperature, this could actually mean that the fish is actually depressed, their metabolic rate is depressed. And so they're actually not putting up enough energy into their reproductive and into growing, etc. So this leaves the species like the scup and the black sea bass as available to explore more the environment and to have a higher fitness and to become more efficient in that environment. We're also seeing that the muscle mechanics are changing. So we looked at red and white muscle. So red muscle is dependent on oxygen, and white muscle is not dependent on oxygen. So we're looking at how temperature affects these muscles. And what we're seeing is that the effects are very species specific, and we cannot really think of what's happening in terms of one temperature affecting one species and not thinking about what's happening to the other species. So we need to have approaches that are species specific, and this information can be output into models so we can actually calculate the productivity of the species. We're actually currently working with professors at the University of Rhode Island to look at that in terms of planktivorous fish. And of course, during COVID, our lab work is actually under social distancing and masks, but we can still are able to measure oxygen consumption. We also did RNA, DNA for condition indexes for this species to see how well they're growing, and we're now doing age and growth studies under different temperatures. So to wrap it up, I wanted to bring it back to why do we care, how we can actually make this part of the blue economy. And I'm fortunate enough to be working with a really large group of amazing scientists in Rhode Island that are funded by the NSF EPSCoR program. This is our project on coastal ecology assessment, innovation and modeling. And we have 3 areas that we are focusing on by assessing the ecosystems, predicting the changes in the ecosystem, and actually improving development of sensors so we can actually react to these changes. And we're really trying to engage all the stakeholders, be it industry partners, be it the fishermen, be it the local communities, by increasing outreach and helping with dissemination of why do we care, why is this important. So lastly, I just wanted to highlight some of our outreach efforts. So we've been trying to divulge science and reach out different communities by partnering with K-12 students on K-12 teachers on increasing the ability to have science literacy and data visualization. So we're deploying data visualization workshops, and we also have a seminar coming up on April 22nd on the European outermost periphery, the Azores and the Euro-Atlantic. So we're trying to just have these conversations that span the whole Atlantic, be conversations with all of you. So with that, I'd like to wrap it up by acknowledging our funding sources and our people, and I'll pass it to Regina. Thank you.
Thank you, Anabela, again for a very interesting and nice presentation. So I think we can move now to the questions from the all participants. So I have here, so those for Elliot are going to be sent by email. So I have here a few questions to Xinlian. So one of the questions is, it seems that suicide spiked during pandemics. Does your work could be used to better understand and then mitigate this situation?
Yes, that's actually exactly what we try to achieve. We tried a multi-pronged approach. One is through mining the large medical records. We individually produce the we try to forecast. Try to tell the odds it may happen within a certain amount of time, so that we can reach out to that individual. And also the geospatial approach is public health approach. We try to pre-allocate resource of Veterans Affairs and DoD, so we can prevent it from happening. And we actually have been keeping close eyes on the pandemic, the influence. What's actually interesting is at the beginning, so we had regular meetings with VA administrations and doctors. At the beginning, actually, they did not report increased suicide rate for a few months. And now we know that actually that we are experiencing more issues, incidents. So there is the lagging in terms of reporting, and it just showed how complicated we are looking at this problem. Thank you for the question.
I was talking to myself. And so we have another question also for you. How do you deal with implicit hull bias in your work?
There are, it's one thing, data is biased by itself. And for example, when we are dealing with the veterans data, it's mostly they are male, and primarily they are 80% Caucasian, maybe 20% people of colors. So we need to keep that in mind. And when we are training, there are different training tricks or techniques. to whether we pre-allocate the data or we can use the results to backpropagate to resample the data and to produce better models. So there are many different ways to deal with that in technical means. But from social or outreach means, that's more challenging, and I don't think it's enough. That will be need more people to get involved. And thanks again. Yeah.
Well, another question, sorry. Deep learning is a mathematical construct made by humans. How can you avoid biases, overfitting and underfitting, since the algorithm is dealing with human lives?
Yes, that's that is the challenge. So it's your result is as good as the data you are feeding it in. So there are many steps we can improve the quality of data, and one is, of course, we control what kind of data coming in. That is one step, and also, as I mentioned, we involve encoding of the data. So when we convert the input into the latent space that actually processed by the model, that is another step to improve the quality of the data. So there are some technical means to deal with that. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if Sofia wants to make a question. I think she has one.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Regina. So I think it would be quite interesting to know, in your opinion, as all of you have been Fulbright awardees or scholarship, or have received a Fulbright scholarship, what is your opinion, the plus or having participated in this program? And this is a question to all of you.
I can start. As a Fulbright PhD fellow coming to the US, it was amazing, especially because of all the programs that we were part of. The ability to just have that cohort, starting with the meetings in New York and meeting people from all over the world, and the ability to also keep up with that, like throughout the years, and keep up with. I made friends back in that first year that I kept throughout life. So it did certainly open a lot of doors, and I think that Americans still don't know enough about Fulbright. I think it's more well known outside of US than it is in the US. It's changing, and that's great. And now I'm really glad that we can actually help the next generation of American scholars that are pursuing Fulbrights across the world.
Thank you. I don't know if Stuart or Xinlian wants to add something to this question, because I have here more questions to both of you regarding your presentation. But since we are discussing the advantage of being a Fulbright scholar, so
I'll just second. It's amazing. It's totally amazing. So when I got to Portugal, actually I was surprised to learn that. So Portugal is more aligned to the continent Europe than to the US in terms of research, because fundings are there. Most funding actually comes from the EU. And so I'm happy to be able to help build the bridge, and that's actually exciting. So you make you think, okay, I'm reaching out to there and helping them reaching out to the US. I think that's exactly the original aspiration purpose of the Fulbright. Personally, of course, I went to, Regina, I went to the beautiful city of Aveiro. I took the boat trip and
took the boat trip.
Right, I went to your coastline, the village with all the stripped houses. That's amazing. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed the food too.
Of course. Yeah.
So Stuart, do you want to say something about this?
Yeah, sure. I would add the wine as well.
Of course.
Depending on where you are. Yeah, I agree with the previous two. I would say also for me, it's an opportunity to sort of break out a little bit from the things that normally occupy me and to look at different levels of engagement in, the university and in fact, governmental setting at FCT and so forth as well. And part of this, I guess, in one visit was because of the flux that the MIT Portugal program had brought to Portugal. And so this got me involved with the sort of highest levels of the administration at Coimbra and a little bit in Lisboa, but not so much. And so for me, that was very interesting to contrast and understand how the Portuguese systems are operating in comparison to, say, the universities that I'm familiar with in the US. So it was a very rewarding experience from that perspective.
Okay, thank you. So we have here 3 additional questions for you, Stuart, regarding your presentation. One of them is regarding, do you have an idea of the percentage of natural wildfires versus human-caused wildfires? Because it seems that in Portugal, most of human-caused fires are prevalent. So is that correct?
So Regina, that question pertained to Portugal?
I think so, because I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so I would have to say, no, I don't have firsthand knowledge on that. Obviously, across the world, including in many of the Atlantic boundary countries, routine prescribed burns are used for forest management purposes. Portugal is a bit sensitive that way because of eucalyptus and other things that are very hard to control. But there's also a tremendous amount of wildland fires in agriculture as well. And this is a huge issue in Africa, for example, where particulate levels are considerably higher during this season. And it's largely due to agricultural burning. And then this is not considered a wildland fire per se, because it is prescribed. So I guess in short, no, I don't have a specific number for you on that. However, some of the data sets do try to break out prescribed and inadvertent fires. In the US, that information is available.
Okay, thank you. So another question is that studies show an increase of super hot wildfires that kill all trees, even in areas where trees are adapted to fire. Can you elaborate on the cause and impact of these super wildfires?
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. In fact, that Smokey the Bear picture I showed you, those trees are adapted to fires. In fact, they don't reproduce without a certain degree of heat. And the challenge is these super hot fires are also really destroying the soil environment, which is sort of incinerating things there. So it's not clear to me how many fires fall into that category at this point. But it's part of an ecological change, which has to be looked at in a very broad way, because as soil moisture changes, then and fire incidence is changed, species also migrate as well. And so we've had, in the US at least, that I know about, a number of large-scale ecological changes that realistically, this fire situation is just one more stressor.
Okay, so I have one question. In urban areas, in cities or mega cities, how do you separate the health effects due to fine particulate matter from wildfires and those that are coming from local sources, from anthropogenic local sources? Is it possible to separate the health effects from these two?
Yeah, so the first question really, I think, is can you separate the contribution due to wildfires from other urban sources? And in areas where you're burning wood or biomass fuels for cooking and heating, you have a lot of the same elemental and organic signatures that
that's my question.
Yeah, so that's a source apportionment question. And in terms of the health effects, a few studies have started to look at short-term rates of disease, hospital admissions, and so forth, following the fire and smoke. So you can look at a time series of hospital admissions, for example, and particulate matter levels, and try to tease out what is the health impact. From even the data that I presented, you have roughly 10 or more times of an impact from the long-term exposure, and that's very, very challenging to separate. And so the other thing that, of course, would interest you is that as particles age, their form changes as well. And so but still, if we look at much of the particulate matter dose-response relationships that have been developed in the US and other places, a lot of that has been combustion related due to motor vehicle fuels, coal-fired power plants. This will have a lot of carbonaceous material, a very small size. It will have a lot of sulfur and sulfate and ions and so forth from that. And forest fire emissions are different. And they include a variety of sizes of particles, and then combustion conditions, so as you know, are extremely variable depending on the phase of the fire. So the number of source apportionments that have separated out forest fire emissions from ambient are very limited, and the health response for forest fire emissions is even more limited. So right now, that's a very open question.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I agree with you. Thanks. So let's thank you very much for your input. So I have here one question for Anabela. Anabela, the question is, the combined effects of turbulence, warming, ocean, and noise seems to be causing great stress to fish stock on top of overfishing. How your research informs policy making?
That's a great question, and that's our goal, is to inform policy management. We're actually working with our partners at Division of Resource Management here in Rhode Island, and we're also working with, we collaborate on occasion with National Marine Fisheries Services to actually provide them with the information that we have on our on the local species and how this is impacting them. So we also do a lot of outreach to explain to fishermen how they can have best practices, right, and how they can actually diminish the impacts that, especially on the species that they're not capturing. And again, as Elliot's presentation was really good at putting like areas that you are not able to fish for certain times, we know that temporal separation of areas of fish open to fisheries and not is actually one of the good ways we can actually manage the populations that way.
I also have one question. What about the ocean acidity? Because you show us the effects of temperature, the seawater temperature. What about the ocean acidity? How this parameter affects the behavior of the fishes, and how this has an effect on the blue economy?
That's a really great question. I mean, I know that in the bay, we're actually still not seeing any effects of the acidity in the adult fish. We are seeing that there's potential, at least from experiments in the lab, that these effects are more prevalent in smaller individuals, so as the fish are developing. So we definitely need to do more studies and to look at not just pH, ocean acidification, but also like pollutants, emerging pollutants. We're starting to look a little bit as one of the points that Stuart mentioned of the PCBs, and trying to look at other pollutants like the pharmaceuticals that are being delivered into the bay. And that's our next project, is going to be looking at how this chemistry of the water is affecting the populations.
What about atmospheric deposition? Do you think it has, because atmospheric deposition can be a source of nutrients, but also of pollutants. So this could also be an important parameter for affecting the behavior of fishes, particularly the small fishes.
That's a really great point, and we are working with physicians to actually do the modeling of all the input sources, be it from the runoff of the land, be it from the atmospheric mixing and sampling. We have a set of buoys that we can actually adapt different sensors to actually detect what's in the water at the surface and also like along the water column.
Okay, so I think, I don't know if we have another question. I don't think so. You answered one already. Let me just finish to everyone for your very interesting and nice talks. Was great to meeting you all. And now I pass the floor to Sofia again.
Thank you very much, Regina. And well, I think this has been a very good afternoon where we have learned quite a lot. And it is really a pleasure to be at these Networking Fridays, because I really think they really network and allow us to network, to connect with each other. And that will then lead to creating the trust there is needed to cooperate and also to act together, because we all know there are a huge number of needs and challenges that are common throughout the Atlantic Ocean. There are a huge number of initiatives that are dealing with them. So this connectivity, this know who is doing what, is excellent. So I really would like to thank all the speakers for this lively and participatory session. It has been a great pleasure to be here with all the speakers and the moderator. And really, when I hear the huge achievements of the researchers' mobility activities, as the one that we have heard today, I really keep smiling, as you see, because we are really doing something that is great through the creation of these programs, these exchange programs. And the promotion of this international cooperation through the mutual understanding and knowledge sharing across the communities is really a great way to improve lives around the world. So thank you to Otília, Macedo, Reis, and all the speakers that we had today, all the participants that were out there hearing us for this great session. So probably José Moutinho will tell you this, but I will also tell you. Today presentations will be shared in the Air Center website. And of course, it will be an honor to count with you for the next Air Center Networking Fridays. And Zé, I pass the floor to you now.
Okay, so I only had to say that thank you all for a fantastic session, and see you next Friday. We'll have a session on science for kids with Ciência Viva. We have kids showing what they learn from science experiments at their home or at their schools. Okay, so thank you all. See you next Friday.
Thank you very much.
Obrigada.
Thank you.